Hey, welcome back to the studio. This is My Day of Play, where you're taken into the real events and actions of how it really went down before the process of editing and cleaning up. This is really how it went. We begin things with music historian Simon Hilton talking about his journey with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Then we're talking about how high Disney once got off the success of their teenage superstars. It's author Ashley Spencer. The Woodland massacre is still a much talked about moment in Hollywood history. Michael Connelly was a journalist on the scene, and sharing his story through a documentary is Alison Ellwood. Then we're going to wrap things up with a true artist on the dance floor, as well as in storybook form, the incredible Lucy Ashe. This is My Day of Play, completely unedited in the way of meeting the wizard behind the curtain. Our entire lives, we've always been told, the show must go on. You must do your thing. And this is one of those days where the voice didn't show up. Now, the goal, really, everything else in my life has been canceled. But my goal today was to go ahead and do this because I had over an hour's worth of conversations that I needed to jump into. But how was I going to be strong and still be understandable when asking the questions? And that was the challenge on this particular day. Hello and good morning, everybody.
Hey, good morning, Aaron.
Whoop. Hang on just one sec. I'm not hooked in all the way properly here. Let me hit the right buttons. You know how that is. You gotta hit.
Oh, I know how that is.
Let's see. Are you coming through my earphones? There you are. Now you're in my headphones. All right.
Now I'm in your headphones. All right, Aaron, you got a double with Simon, so take it away.
Good morning. How are you doing today, Simon?
I'm great, Arrow. It's very nice to meet you.
Well, I'm so excited to share a conversation with you because I'm one of the late bloomers of John Lennon. And it was well after his transition that I became such a fan. And I think it's because of his story and not necessarily about his fame. And your book really gives that to us, that story.
I'm so pleased that you said that. His lifetime is he lived the life of a million lifetimes, right? And it's very interesting whenever you see a kind of potted biography that it can be broken down into so many parts, which also bear examination. And believe me, the first edition of this book was about 10 times the size of what we have now, because there's just no scarcity. You know, they were doing multiple different things every day that were very exciting. And, John and Yoko as a pair of artists to work with is possibly the greatest privilege anyone could have in terms of the variety of artistic output. It's phenomenal.
I just wish the music industry looked at that collaboration as being as such, like Hall & Oates and other collaborators. I mean, she was such a major part in his journey.
Yeah, I think to be fair, I think they are more and more now. And, obviously there's been quite a bit of racism and, anti-feminism, and we're coming into a much more enlightened age now. And I'm finding certainly amongst the younger fans that they have virtually zero prejudice towards Yoko and are much more open to all of their ideas, which is really refreshing. It's lovely to see.
One of the things that you do in this book is that you feature the artwork. Well, that's how I got to be with Yoko Ono, was because of the artwork and because the show came to Charlotte and they made it a point that we got to talk with her. And my God,
great! I'm so glad you met her.
Oh, yeah. to be even connected to her story with this artwork, because if John would have had his way, he would have thrown it away.
With which particular artwork are you talking about?
His sketches. She's the one that got him out of the trash can.
Oh no, I think a lot of stuff was kept, and John had a great deal of sketchbooks that were kept. There's a lot that just hasn't been released. John, as far as I know, used to spend a lot of time just drawing. So
yes.
Where people would chew gum or smoke, he'd just sit there drawing when he had to wait for something. And of course, if you're in a recording studio for a long period of time, or you're just sort of sitting waiting, he'd get out a pen and paper and just start drawing. And there's some great stories of when John first meets David Bowie, and they just spend some time drawing one another for a while, which I think is really sweet. But he was a great sketcher, and I think that the drawing was part of the visualization process for him. Of getting ideas out of his head and onto paper. And he'd been at art college, and had studied life drawing and lettering as part of his art degree. So he was very connected to all of that side of things. You know, I think in some ways he was more of an art student than he was a musician.
Yeah, because I mean that's one thing that I've always loved about him is the fact that he's almost like a stream thinker. He lets things happen and he allows it to move through him, and it ends up on a page.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see from the Get Back film, you know, that Peter Jackson put together so skillfully recently, that rather than being a sort of aggressor, which he was painted as being in that earlier period, that he was very much a collaborator. And his warmth and his love and his desire to collaborate and to have people collaborate with him really shone through in the Get Back film, I felt.
You know, one of the things that you touch on this that I wish that a lot more radio people or even just journalists would understand is that we don't know who the Plastic Ono Band is, but you go into it and say that it's more than just Yoko being there.
Yeah, I mean, the Plastic Ono Band was a concept that the pair of them came up with back in 68, 69.
Wow.
And it was originally a plastic sculpture that had cassette players and microphones and various playback devices and cameras in. So it started off as a conceptual idea. And then the idea grew from that into it being whatever musicians were playing with them at the time, and then into the audience being that their collaboration meant that they were part of the band too, which I think is a rather wonderful idea, you know. And when you think about the virality of what you do, you know, if you're singing a song about love and people in the audience start warming to that feeling that you're singing about and feeling what you're trying to express, that's where the audience starts to become the Plastic Ono Band too. So I think, you know, in many ways, Plastic Ono Band was a movable feast. The original Plastic Ono Band was made of plastic and it was part conceptualized with Ono. But it grew into a much bigger idea. And for this one, he called it the Plastic UFO No Band.
So when it came to John Lennon and his music, you talked about the lyrics there. What about a song like Imagine? Because it sounds like a love song, but when you read the lyrics, it's not a love song.
I think Imagine's a really interesting case in point because I think it's a punk anthem. And because the words are going completely against what everybody was, you know, quite strictly adhering at the time. You know, imagine there's no heaven, right? So if you put a rock beat to that, you could see that being, you know, naturally going with the lyrics. But because it was put across with loads of sugar in a kind of bark-like chord sequence, it's a bit whiter shade of pale, it's a bit bark, you know, with strings and very gentle. You know, it's now become an anthem. You know, it's played every year at the Olympics. It's the song that gets wheeled out when anybody has a crisis. And it's an absolutely beautiful song. And it's actually come to represent a more progressive side of thinking that opens you up to a much broader world. So it doesn't kind of pigeonhole you into one religion or thought process that makes you exclusive to anybody else. It actually opens you out to everything and includes atheism, agnosticism. I think it's really beautiful. And actually, as a structure, if you look at the way it's structured in terms of its iambic pentameters and the meter of the words, it's really close to it's really very close to an absolutely perfect poem. Wow.
You know, it's through John Lennon that I truly do live a lifestyle of I love all people. I have compassion for all people. Even if they are bitter enemies, I still love all people. And to me, that was the message of John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think it's very interesting if you look at their lives, how much difficulty and strife they went through and how much pain and how much combating that pain and how many people were trying to rip them off and do stuff. And yet throughout that, their creative output was always been love, peace, and truth.
Yeah.
You know, and if you examine the songs and the lyrics of the songs, and, you know, you can listen to the Mind Games box set that we've got out at the moment that deep dives into the album, where the mind games are really about trying to play positive mind games with one another, you know, giving out peace and love in order that might reflect in your friends and to create a better world. So in many ways, Mind Games is a continuation from the themes of Imagine. of peace and love.
Yeah.
But in a very progressive way. And I think it's really beautiful and very infectious.
Personally and professionally, what is it about the album Mind Games? Because the reason why I bring that up is because I can listen to it, and every single time it feels like it's fresh and brand new. I've never understood that.
Yeah, I think the standard of the musicianship on the album is incredible. And we went on a pretty amazing journey with Sean as he led the team through the remixing of the album for the new Ultimate collection mixes, which are out now, folks. But when they first mixed the album, it was mixed in a very kind of high treble way, so it worked on AM radio and would sound good on tinny car speakers. And now our hi-fi playback systems are so much more sophisticated that we mixed it across the entire dynamic range. So it allowed us to hear so much more detail in all the contributors and the fantastic musicians. And the guys who play on this album were really the equivalent to the New York equivalent to the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah,
they were really experienced New York session musicians. And, in the box set, we explore all of their different contributions musically and isolate some of them so you can hear the detail from what they play. But I think part of what makes the album really listenable so much is that these guys were so experienced that they knew that if there's 4 of you playing, you leave space for 4 of you and for the singer.
Yep.
You don't play all over the top of one another. And if there's 8 of you playing, you leave space for 8 of you. You leave gaps and room. So it's more of a conversation. And I think that's something that comes over really beautifully in the mix, is the kind of the space that it all creates.
Yeah.
And also, the lyrics are very powerful. There's some great songwriting on this album.
Yeah. Well,
and I think the earlier production on the album kind of held it back from being recognized as being such a songwriting masterpiece.
I mean, you talk about his lyrics. Oh my God, something would come to him when everybody least expected it, and he would go with it because it was something that he felt in that moment. And I just can't imagine what it was like to receive such incredible things like that.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. If you listen to isolated vocal takes of him singing, his singing is really in the moment. You can hear that he's feeling each word and phrase as he's singing it. And it's a really unique talent he had for when he was going in to do the final master vocal takes. You could just really feel that he was experiencing everything that he meant to say in those words. And he never really liked his voice, but I just think he's one of the best singers that's ever existed. Like, the emotion and the tone is incredible.
Right. What is it like for you to get that close to vocals when you've got just his voice? And the reason why I bring that up is because I have a copy of Bohemian Rhapsody from Queen, where I get to go in and listen to everybody's individual voices with no instrumentation at all. So for you to be that close to John Lennon, come on, it had to have changed you.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's very profound, and also putting the books together. We've been very lucky. I've been very lucky to be able to deep dive into the archives and find out, much more in terms of letters and correspondence and, photos and what they were reading. I mean, one of the sections in this book goes into all of the paperbacks and literature they were reading. We go into, their re-embrace of magical thinking during this period. And, they were filming and recording things as they went. But I think, it does rub off. And certainly working with Yoko for 20 years has been a very proud experience. I mean, she's never shy of picking up the phone and calling and then speaking to us. So.
and her soft voice. Her voice is so soft.
Oh, she's a sweetheart. I love her to bits. She's absolutely fantastic.
Don't you think that if they would have had the internet and or social media, they would have been all over it? In fact, let's go this route. Do you not think that John Lennon and Yoko Ono created social connections because they were always making the connection?
Twitter was built for Yoko, and when Yoko jumped on Twitter, that was extraordinary. And when it was great fun when she was doing her, agony aunt stuff. And I think a lot of her Grapefruit book and her epithets are really built for social media. Although social media has changed quite a lot, in the past few years and become fairly antisocial. Mm-hmm. I think John would have been a very powerful voice for peace. And I think he would have been very outspoken. I think it's difficult. The world's changed now and people are more afraid to speak out. I don't think John would be afraid to speak out. I think he would be a terrific voice because he really stood up for what he believed in, and he stood up for the people around him. He really believed in the power of people, and the power of people for change and betterment, and to imagine a better world. So did you.
But he was able to put it in a language that people found no judgment with. In other words, this album was very dark, but yet when you listen to it, I don't feel darkness.
Yeah, I mean, John was great with slogans, wasn't he? And with Tracy and reducing ideas down to really small words and phrases that got things over really concisely. And it's difficult when you're a songwriter to try and express something very concisely in as few words as possible. And I think John was a master of that. And that's what makes him possibly the greatest songwriter that's ever walked this earth.
Wow. Some of my favorite pictures of John Lennon are actually him inside that engineering studio, because I really felt like that he was part of everything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were great friends with Roy Cicala, who ran the record plant in New York. And that it was their second home in many ways. It was a very, very familiar and loved place for them. And they spent a lot of time there. And I think they felt a lot of safety there. During this time, they were out and they were being tailed by the FBI. And, they had all kinds of people following them and wanting them. But when they were in the studio, they were in their safe place, definitely. And certainly, with John having, look, you've grown up in Abbey Road, for goodness sake.
Exactly.
What an incredible honor to be able to do that and to work with such amazing collaborators with Paul, George, Ringo, and George Martin, and the great engineers they had there. So, by the time John had got to New York, he was very learned about how to put sounds together and had a great deal of studio experience. Isn't it funny, though, as a musician, when you see a great musician, they make it look so easy. Like, Eric Clapton's nicknamed the slow hand because it just looks effortless. And I think that's one of the deceptive things about great songwriting, is that it comes over as effortless. But the amount of work that goes into it is so infinite. It's like the Zen painting master who sits by the river for 20 years and then does one brushstroke. And it's the most beautiful brushstroke you've ever seen. There's just so much experience and wit and collaboration that he brings in. It's just been really wonderful to discover that.
Yeah. Was he
I've been very lucky.
Was he a master of transformation? What I mean by that is that it seems like that he always accepted change. This is it. Let's grow with it.
I think he was a move-on person. Bowie, I think, was more of a master of transformation because he would really transform into a different theatrical image. John was much more about a self-betterment, I think, and seeking ways to be a better human being. And then he'd explore different ideas. And then if it didn't really work, he'd just put it down and move on to trying something else. But a lot of John's stuff he didn't like the lipstick and the, all of that side of thing. A lot of his thought process was much more about being real and what's going on inside your head and how you can be better with other people. Whereas David, I suppose, is much more theatrical and an entertainer, like Elton too. And they're so good at it. What incredible performers they are. But with John, I think it was much more about what's going on inside your head. And perhaps he would have been a psychologist or, anthropologist if he hadn't been a musician.
Wow. One of the things that you open up my eyes with this book is the fact that the greatest thing that they did together. I always knew about the love and peace and different protests in the band, but I didn't realize they fought so much for women's rights. And you opened up my heart with this.
Oh, I'm so pleased. Yeah. They attended the first International Women's Conference at Harvard University. And Yoko became very involved with the feminist movement at that time. And they supported Ms. Magazine. And they've also, behind the scenes, put in a lot of financial support for women's rights. I think what had happened is, with the kind of macho left, the yippies, the Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman, I think they came to a point with those guys where they realized that they were agitators, but they were not, once the revolution was done, who was then going to lead the world? And I don't think that they felt that these guys had leadership qualities.
Oh.
They were revolutionaries, they were comedic, but they weren't going to lead people to, once you've had the revolution, what do you do then? What do you do then? What do you set up? What's the world? What's the plan? Whereas the feminists, I think, had solutions. The women were coming in with solutions-based offers of equality, and were discussing how to make a better world in a very collaborative way. Obviously, Yoko's a very strong woman, so of course John will be a feminist. I think anybody around Yoko is going to be a feminist.
So true.
And also, John was going through a big period of change in his life. So, but yeah, they remain very keen, and Yoko's still very strongly involved in the feminist movement to this day.
I love it. Simon, you've got to come back to this show anytime in the future. Like I said,
anytime you like, man. Just give me a call.
I mean, just we've got to keep John Lennon's name in the future and keep planting it inside the hearts of the up and coming generations.
I'm down, man. It's been great talking to you. Just give me a call anytime.
You bet. You be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you. That's very sweet. I've really enjoyed it. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Go rest up.
Okay, don't move, because coming up next, we're going to be talking about Disney and all of those teens who made the Disney Channel huge.
Recording in progress.
For 20 minutes. And,
okay.
And Arrow,
Hey,
there you are.
what's going on, man? Not much of a voice today, so I apologize in advance.
I was going to say, you have a cold there?
Oh, man, there's so much. Usually during the change of seasons down here with all this moisture, and now we got a hurricane that's heading this direction, so, it really does affect us.
Well, don't waste too much energy trying to, just do your thing. You always do. Ashley is here, and you'll have till top of the hour, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Feel better.
Good morning, Ashley. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm sorry you're not feeling well.
It's just, with radio people, when something gets into our voice, it's not that the body is feeling bad. It's just that when the voice is affected, I mean, it really does. It's like playing an out-of-tune guitar.
It's the instrument. You need it in prime condition.
Absolutely. I'm so proud of you for writing this story. And the reason why is because we have all experienced this. We just don't know the story, Ashley.
Yes, honestly, that's why I wanted to do it. I couldn't believe no one had told this story before. It's touched so many people. Disney Channel was so huge in the 2000s, and there were so many angles to explore that I knew people would want to know what it was like to be part of that machine at the time.
Well, it was so big. I mean, I've been a mobile entertainer for 32 years. And the thing is, though, is that the artists that you put focus on here, their music has put people on my dance floor.
Yes. I mean, a lot of the artists that came out of Disney Channel are still some of the biggest pop artists today, like people like Miley Cyrus and Selena Gomez and songs. I mean, Jonas Brothers, there's just so many. I love pop music, and I listen to all of these artists now, and I even think the work that they did while they were teenagers on Disney Channel, a lot of it holds up, and it's just great music.
What was it about the Disney Channel's tween empire that made them such a standout? Is it because they wrote stories that everybody could relate with, or was it about fantasizing?
I think it's both. It's both of those things. So what they really tapped into with the characters they had on the shows, but also with the talent they were casting and finding, is they found people that felt aspirational and cool when you're, 10 years old, 11 years old, someone who's slightly older, who has cool clothes, who is fun, but also a little bit, they're a good role model. They're mostly good at school, those kind of things. But they also feel like someone who could be your best friend, that's going to be nice to you if you went up to them and just met them in the wild, that they wouldn't be a mean girl. And so they really struck that balance of relatable yet aspirational. And then when you add in the music elements, there have been studies that the music you listen to as a teenager shapes your music for life. Like there are things that just get so ingrained in you at that age. You're still figuring out who you are as a person. You develop a lot of attachments to the entertainment you consume as a kid. So not only do you have them hitting music and TV, it's just constant. It's, they're playing these shows all the time. Disney Channel is in so many homes by the 2000s. They're able to really just be a part of kids' lives in a huge way that they previously weren't.
But how many of them went through the evolution that Miley Cyrus did? Because, I mean, first of all, everything was Hannah Montana, Hannah Montana, Hannah Montana. And then she had to make that choice to become Miley Cyrus. I don't know any other story or any other person that went through this.
Miley is really unique from day one. So Miley obviously came from a musical family. Her father was Billy Ray Cyrus, who had a hit in the early 90s with Achy Breaky Heart. He had a really strong outside music management team, which then carried over to Miley. And she was, being managed by these people who were really savvy in the music industry. And what that did, and she obviously had incredible raw vocal talent as a 12-year-old. I mean, she already just blew people away. That was a huge reason why they cast her. She was not the best actor. She was not the most experienced. She was a bit of a loose cannon. They didn't know what she was going to do next, but she was so charismatic. She had that it factor and she had that musical talent. And so you have her coming in, bringing this kind of musical background along with her. And that's able to give her a little more influence than what previous and post Disney Channel stars were able to do, because they kind of shaped her music. And then Hannah Montana got so huge that made Miley so huge and so famous. And she became so valuable to the Disney Channel brand that she was able to push those limits more than anyone before her ever had.
Wow. I think I fell deeper in love with the skills of Miley Cyrus when Stevie Nicks embraced her. That was my generation accepting Miley Cyrus.
She's incredible. And I think she's so unique. No one has a voice that sounds like Miley Cyrus. Right. When you hear her sing, you know who's singing. And I think that's a big part of the appeal, is it's not just a cookie cutter manufactured voice that you might expect coming from this sort of machine. Like, she was just her own self from day one.
And Zac Efron, to me, he is the Kurt Russell of this generation. I mean, because he was such a punk little kid, but now look at him. I think his acting skills are just amazing.
Yes. Did you see The Iron Claw?
Yes, I did. I experienced that thing.
He was robbed of an Oscar, in my opinion.
I
think
agree.
He gave an incredible performance. It was so touching. He is so talented, and he always had his eye on that prize. He knew he wanted to be a movie star from the time he was a young kid, and that's really what he worked towards. And High School Musical was the vehicle that let him get to that broader stage.
Well, I mean, the High School the Musical is still inspiring people, because I just did a conversation with somebody that does Kindergarten the Musical. I mean, it's all connected, and we love stories like this.
Yes, High School Musical. I mean, I have friends with young kids, and I kind of, in my research, I would ask them, well, what movies are your kids watching? And it would be some of the new Disney movies, but it was also, they still love High School Musical. High School Musical is reaching the next generation, and the first one came out in 2006. So it's a timeless story. It really, I think, harkened back to the ethos of Grease, or something those classic tales of coming of age, and it had sports and it had music. And so it's really reaching as wide of an audience as possible. And it's so catchy. Those songs are great. And
it was so powerful. And the reason why is because, I mean, I did proms back in the early years, and they were all based on High School the Musical. And if I didn't have that song, how dare I even go into that school?
The High School Musical soundtrack was the #1 album of any album in 2006. And it did not get mainstream radio play. They were on Radio Disney, but these are like musical theater songs on kids' cable. It's mind blowing to me, the level that it achieved and how wide it went.
Well, I've always credited Disney with High School Musical and all these other ones for being in a proper position in why we love dance today, Dancing with the Stars, and So You Think You Can Dance. I think it's because of this generation.
That's really interesting. I think so too. Also have something like Glee, which came years after High School Musical, which is obviously a little bit more mature show. But what happened, because it was a few years after High School Musical, the kids that had grown up with High School Musical and became primed to love singing and dancing, suddenly Glee is there waiting for them when they're a little bit older, teenagers. I mean, in theory, she could have. She does have Disney connections, so she actually co-wrote. Yeah, she co-wrote the song "You'll Always Find Your Way Back Home" from the Hannah Montana movie. Wow. And she also has a cameo in the movie and sings one of her original songs called "Crazier." And she was kind of in that world on the periphery. So she was good friends with Selena Gomez at that time. She and Miley performed at the Grammys together. She was always kind of bouncing around that world. but she was her own kind of individual independent star from day one. She wasn't part of this TV world. But she definitely, I think her impact can still be felt there.
Yeah. Well, we got to talk about Selena Gomez, because I love the interview that I heard with Steve Martin and Martin Short, and that is when they go, we didn't even know who Selena Gomez was when they teamed up with her on that show. Oh, my God. And they were blown away by this talent.
She is incredible. When I would speak to people that knew her when she was a very young tween, first auditioning for Disney Channel shows and working eventually on Wizards of Waverly Place as the lead actress on that show. She adored Friends. She studied Jennifer Aniston's mannerisms and the comedic timing when she was a little kid. She and her mom used to watch all of that. And I think you can see that even in her performances today. But she just has this wonderful dry wit and delivery. And then her songs as well. I think, she worked with some great producers and made some really smart choices with the music she's put out over the years, and managed to have a really successful music career. Even though acting, I think, is her first love and what she wants to be doing, I think she can do it all.
Well, even as an adult, I really wanted the Bieber Selena thing to go and make it work, because I thought they were our royalty in this nation.
That was a huge moment in time. That was really the Brad and Jen of tweendom. Everyone wanted to know everything about them. They were the first couple of teen pop stars. But I think they're doing okay without each other.
Christina Aguilera, my God, to this day, that voice, that presence that she brought. I mean, the people that found these talented children just blow me away, because they saw something the rest of us had to catch up with.
Christina Aguilera, I mean, she got her start on the all-new Mickey Mouse Club in the 90s, and she was tiny, the tiniest little thing with the biggest voice. So they're going around the country, and they made a deliberate decision to not cast kids out of New York or LA. So they're going to smaller towns, regional hubs, Canada. They're looking all over to find kids that had what they really valued, which was this level of authenticity and relatability. They didn't want kids that felt like child stars, that felt like they're delivering lines and they're polished performers. These were kids that just had raw talent, and they brought that to the network and to the performances. And then I think that really laid the foundations for what you saw with Christina's success in the late 90s with Genie in a Bottle and all that. And that was on non-Disney record labels. So they began bemoaning the fact that they were not part of that rise and her stardom then. But I think, the foundations were really laid at Disney Channel. I
was a huge fan of the Jonas Brothers on TV, and then we all thought as fans, they went away, but then they came back as a big, great band. And I've been with those guys because they've got a connection to the Carolinas. Their family has a restaurant just up the road here. Yeah. And oh my God, I mean, they are such down-to-earth, everyday people.
Mm-hmm. That was something that, again, when I would speak to people that knew them as teenagers, someone said when they were working on their Disney Channel sitcom, the first day when they, called cut, and the brothers went around to every single person working on that set and individually shook their hands and thanked them for their time. Someone said, well, I was a little bit skeptical, like, what is this act? And then you quickly realize, no, that's just who they are. And they've been raised in a way that is a huge value their family put on them, that you appreciate the people around you, that you're recognizing everyone is contributing to this machine.
The Jonas Brothers had some serious competition. I mean, all those boy bands. And of course, what about Hanson?
I was a Hanson girl as a child. But yeah, so actually Hanson, so the Steve Greenberg at Columbia Records is who, and he was at Mercury before that, and he is who kind of discovered Hanson, and then later was the ones who brought Jonas Brothers into the Columbia fold. So there's that connection. The through line goes there, and I think the girls that were the fans that were Hanson fans had kind of aged out of that demo by the time Jonas Brothers came along. So they just kind of tore.
Imagine if Jodie Foster or Kurt Russell, wow, this whole entire tween thing with Disney would have been, much, much earlier.
I don't even know. Maybe they could have sang. I don't know. Maybe that just wasn't something they even considered, that they could tap into a Jodie Foster pop album. Who knows?
Wow. Well, what did you learn about doing this project? Because, you had to as a student.
Yeah, I think I learned so much. I think the idea we have of Disney being this all-powerful corporation that is a machine, that everyone is working together to achieve a common goal. And especially wasn't the case in the early 2000s and 90s, when these divisions were very hesitant to come together. Everyone was pretty competitive in their own lane and didn't see the value in Disney Channel itself. So the record labels originally didn't want to take on Disney Channel talent. Hollywood's had Insane Clown Posse. They had Queen's back catalog. Like, they were trying to be a different kind of record label. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until you have these individual executives really kind of pushing things along and fighting this uphill battle to say, hey, let's try this. Let's see what works. And they all start realizing this is a lucrative endeavor. Let's get on board.
Somebody we haven't talked about, and he's going to step on my foot if I don't bring up his name, Justin Timberlake. Oh, my God. We're talking future Rock and Roll Hall of Famer here.
Yeah, another all-new Mickey Mouse Club kid. And it was really interesting. So the acting coach on the all-new Mickey Mouse Club spoke to me for the book, and he was part of the kids' auditions. And they would, because this is the 90s, they had pieces of paper when they would come in an audition, and they would give them letter grades in different categories. And so he shared with me these grades and his comments from the original auditions. And I think Justin Timberlake got a B+, and his note was raw but good. So he just had that something special as a young kid that he might need a little polishing, he might need a little bit more guiding, but something special was there.
Would you say that their musical success later on in life was because they were actors first and they knew how to deliver a line?
That's interesting. Maybe, but you also have someone like Miley Cyrus, who acting did not come naturally to her. The music came easily to her. It took her a long time to learn the difference between stage left and camera left. Yeah. And so acting was a bit slower for her. But I think the foundations at Disney Channel, Selena Gomez has talked about the work ethic. And I mean, it was a huge load for these kids to carry. There was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of publicity they were doing. They're doing interviews when they're 14 years old with adults day in and day out. So, I mean, the life of a child star is a very strange place to be. And as a Disney Channel star in particular, you have these pressures of being a role model. But I think for the ones that continue in entertainment and wanted to continue being in the spotlight, that foundation probably served them well in a lot of ways.
Do you think Disney can rebuild this empire?
I think it would be incredibly difficult to do in the current media landscape. Yeah. And it's not Disney's fault per se. It's the way that kids consume content, the way that we all consume content is not what was happening 20 years ago. You don't pick up a remote and turn on a TV as a child and have the option between, am I going to watch Nickelodeon today or Disney Channel? And I'm just going to turn it on and hours are going to go by where I consume everything you show me. Now kids all have phones. They are watching YouTube. They're forming attachments with a TikToker, and they just share viral memes and videos. And so those are very fleeting transactions. You're not loyal necessarily to a show in the way that you were with Hannah Montana, with Lizzie McGuire. But, and some of them are. I mean, you might be a huge fan of this individual TikToker, but what's happening is, are all of your friends a fan of that same person, or are they liking someone different? You don't have that shared experience. You don't have 17 million people watching the premiere of High School Musical 2 together and being able to reminisce about that a decade later. So I don't know what the future holds.
Well, Disney would have to go to something of a format of, it has to be 30 seconds long and you better solve the mystery in 25 seconds.
They've tried different things. There was a show called Bizarre Bark, which is actually where Olivia Rodrigo got her start on Disney Channel. And yes, and that the premise of that was that it was two girls making a YouTube style show. So they tried to put it within the show that they're doing these little short form sketches. And so they've tried different things, but Olivia Rodrigo, she didn't break out until she was on High School Musical, the series, which was a Disney Plus show. So that's now beyond Disney Channel. And then her music, none of that was on a Disney record label, her solo music. She signed with Universal Geffen. And so she's able to do a lot more edgy work than what she would have been beholden to as a Disney Channel music star. Wow.
Ashley, you've got to come back to this show anytime in the future because I love your storytelling capability.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm happy to.
All right. You be brilliant today, okay?
Thanks. You too.
Laurel Canyon has always been famous for the music that came from there. But did you know about the Wonderland Massacre? Oh, we're talking about it next. Michael, how are you doing?
Fresh.
How you doing today, guy?
I'm all right. How are you doing?
Oh man, my voice is thrash, so I'm probably going to be sounding like a K95.5. every jock wants to have a voice like that, man.
We'll call you Arrow Thunder for the rest of the
There
day.
you go.
These folks are all yours. Take them till 29.
You guys, this is just an amazing project. I mean, and one of the things that listeners need to understand that this didn't just happen. You guys have held on to this for so long.
Well, it's a hard story to wrap your arms around because decade by decade, there were new twists and turns. And, that was part of what fascinated me with the project, and I'm sure Alison as well.
Well, Michael, how did you even get your hands around this? And I think there's probably still things that you haven't got your arms around yet because, I mean, like you said, it just keeps changing.
Well, I moved to Los Angeles in the mid-'80s, and this was right in the middle of this case. There were multiple trials in the 1980s, and then it was totally an unrequited justice story. But then it reemerged after 2000. And so it is a story that keeps giving. And so it's fascinated me for a long time. And by virtue of my former life as a journalist and my more recent life as a novelist, I ended up knowing almost all the detectives that were involved in this case. And they talk about it from time to time. They introduced me to Scott Thorson, who's kind of like our through line character, who carries a lot of the story because of his fascinating life and story. And, so at one point I said, I should tell this story because there's been movies, there's been books, there's been other documentaries, but nothing that really kind of brought it all together.
Yeah, because many of us read about this story through the National Enquirer, and therefore we drew up our own, interpretation of the storyline itself.
Yeah, this is the kind of story that goes from the National Enquirer to the New York Times, which I love that they looked at Scott Thorson and called him the Zelig of awful. And I think that really kind of wraps up what he was about. But yeah, I mean, this is a story that not only all levels of media, but it touches all levels of society and has a kind of a historical importance to me, at least, about how this villainous drug dealer in Laurel Canyon really was part of changing society.
Well, Alison, you had to have been called into this because the story had to be told. I mean, this wasn't pretty much in your backyard?
No, not really. I had just finished Laurel Canyon, A Place in Time, which is about the music scene in Laurel Canyon and the bucolic neighborhood and these houses where all this creativity happened. And this story was the negative image of that. And so I was intrigued to dive into it with that in mind, because it's like things had turned upside down.
How do you go from a project like that? Because I was addicted to your documentary, and I felt like I still didn't get enough, but now you're on the opposite side of that, showing something else. Yeah.
And we wanted to take a very, film noir negative image approach to this. And I wanted, they had been doing the podcast, and Michael had shared with me some of his interviews that he had done with Scott in preparation for that. And they were Zoom interviews, and I could see the kind of cat and mouse game going on. And we've got to get this on camera visually because it's so interesting seeing, Michael push Scott for answers, because the answers sometimes seem so outrageous.
Mm-hmm. So California, the way I look at it. So Michael, I love this about the storyline. There's a little truth in every lie, and you had to go through that and figure out what was the truth.
Yeah, I mean, it was really when Alison said she wanted me on camera interviewing these people, I first was probably reluctant, but then I realized, I've been watching and writing about detectives for 40 years. And now it was my chance to be the detective and to answer the questions. And that was the thing. Scott Thorson is the through line of the story. He was the guy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had knowledge about the origins of this quadruple murder. And, he's also almost a lifelong drug addict. So it's one of these things where you have to parse his answers and confirm stuff or deny it. And he told some outlandish stories, had like an outlandish life, but most of it we were able to document. And what you see on the screen we stand behind. I stand behind because of the way we went about confirming details, through documents, through prior interviews, through detectives having to solidify his story before they would allow him to testify in court and so forth. And that to me was my through line. That was fascinating to me. And I think that is, Alison captured that on the film.
Yeah, I can't imagine what you had to go through with that footage, Alison, in the way that, it's all there, but there was always more that you could find.
Yeah, I mean, there's amazing archive material that we were able to dig up on this, and including like this when Scott gets shot in Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, who would have thought there'd be local coverage of that? And that was like amazing. And then the young interviews with Scott, we don't reveal until the 4th episode where those interviews come from, and when it's revealed where they come from, you're just even more shocked.
When you went out to L.A., Michael, was it something was it the fantasy jog out to L.A.? And then when you got there, it's like, oh, there's a bigger story here than I could ever imagine.
Well, I think that's pretty much what happens in L.A. There's always roots and stories that anything can be blown up bigger than it appears at first. I was a journalist for a long time. I covered crime for like 14 years for multiple newspapers, and really felt like I came home when I moved to LA in the 80s. And, my ultimate goal was to write novels, but I viewed my journalism career as research for that. I loved watching detectives work and writing about these kind of cases. And this one is very novelistic to me. You have an unreliable narrator in Scott Thorson. You got to check out everything he says. As one of our detectives says in the documentary, he talks out of both sides of his mouth.
Yep.
And then you have a villain in Eddie Nash who, every novel has to have the detectives, the cops going up against a really strong adversary. And Eddie Nash is the guy who kept slipping through their fingers.
Alison, did you ask the question many times, how many killers could there have been here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the detectives all pretty much feel that it had to have been at least 4 to 5 people that went in there to have done that damage, that much damage that quickly without, because they didn't even have time to wake up. Only one of them fought back.
Scott was the only survivor, so therefore, did he go through a spiritual journey? Do you know, Michael?
Well, he says he did, and we document that, but with him, you always got to wonder, was this a money-making operation for him, or did he really feel like he was looking for redemption and religion? And I think the viewers are going to have to decide that. I think we make it pretty clear that he is a guy, no matter what situation he is in, he thinks about, how can I benefit? How can I turn this towards me? How do I benefit from this? How do I make money? How do I buy drugs?
Wow. Alison, I mean, one of the things that's very interesting here that listeners need to know is that, we all think of California being the city that it is, and we think of, in the 1980s with the drug abuse, that's Compton. That Compton had that image. But in Laurel Canyon?
Yeah, I mean, the drugs came into Laurel Canyon. That's why some of those artists left too. It's like, the whole thing turned around. And then, then the crack epidemic that Scott and Nash were involved with in early stages. Michael was a journalist back then and covered a quadruple murder in that realm of the story, and didn't get nearly the attention that the Wonderland case did.
Do you think that's because of the connection with Liberace?
Definitely that has something to do with it, but it's, I mean, there's celebrities, but it was also this, these were Black people killed in a neighborhood that nobody was caring about. So the story went ignored, other than the writing that Michael was doing.
Michael, getting that interviewed before the transition, I can't imagine what your show prep was, or did you go into it being a listener because you knew what kind of a speaker he was?
I was somewhat prepared. I've had a relationship with Scott for, I guess it was going on 4 years. When I first started talking to him, he was actually in prison in Nevada. And then he was on a probation where he couldn't leave Las Vegas. So I did a lot of Zooms with him. And I did a podcast with him. But as Alison said, the podcast can't even touch what we did in this documentary, especially with all the visual archives and how all that is pulled together in these 4 parts.
Well, Alison, the directing and the producing of this at the level that you have, to me, this embraces so many needs that we do as podcast listeners as well as documentary people, because you've got true crime here, you've got journalism, you've got a storyline here. I mean, you're covering every single plate.
Yeah, I mean, this story, it couldn't have been a richer story to dive into. And again, with all of the amazing archival material we found. And we wanted to have it, have a film noir look. And we, stylized our recreations that way. Even the shots of Michael driving around LA are kind of moody. And we wanted LA to be a character in this and to have a presence in this story as well.
Wow, I just can't imagine how you're still holding on to this, Michael, and how you deal with it. I mean, are you taking notes almost like every day?
Pretty much. I mean, the thing about this case is, and I've done other podcasts and documentaries and so forth. And sometimes people or most of the time, people are reluctant to talk about cases way in the past. And this one, from the prosecutors to the detectives who kept passing the baton of the investigation, they all wanted to talk. And I think that comes back to how it's all stuck in their craw that people got away with this. And there were some levels of justice, but ultimately justice was not served in this case. And so they wanted to talk about it. In a way, it was an exorcism for them to talk about it. Wow.
I love the title of the episode, The Heat of a Cold Case. That is so like, oh, I've got to dig into this.
Yeah, well, that came from a line from Rick Jackson when he and Michael were talking. That's right out of that scene.
So what did you learn from this project, and what do you continue to learn from it, Alison? Because, I mean, once again, this is a story that just, it's so Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, it's Hollywood, but it is, it's about society and how things can, this darker side of what happened there with the crack epidemic. I mean, to think that Nash and Scott were that involved in something so early on that the cops didn't even know what was happening.
Wow. Now, Michael, will the two of you continue to have a collaboration? Because there are mysteries all over this nation.
Yeah, no, I hope we do. And we're talking about something, the subhead, as you mentioned, the secret history of Hollywood. That is attractive to us as journalists, as filmmakers, but I think it's also attractive to viewers and people who are drawn to the genre of true crime. And I think that's our strike zone, and I think that's what we're going to talk about, doing something else in that regard.
In 1990, Scott testified against the alleged mastermind. I mean, that had to have been a very, very tight room.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's funny. The alleged mastermind. What a hook just to say we have a story with a mastermind. You need a big villain and a really villain who's difficult to bring to justice. And we have that in the story. And as Alison said, the archival stuff that we got in this, that dramatic testimony of Scott Thorson, which we have in the film here, it's really gripping. And then to go from that, from 1990 and the interview we did with him earlier this year, it's really a fascinating journey.
It's so funny that we talk about 1990 like it was just yesterday, and yet, I mean, the story itself feels like it is today. I mean, I guess we give you the credit, Alison.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because the story took place over so many decades and each time something new was being revealed, that it feels like it takes us up to present day. But, it was really 2001 when this basically ended.
Wow. Well, we got to give your team kudos, because you had a whole team with you to create this, Alison.
Yeah, we sure did. We had amazing producers with Jen and Nick and Tess Ranahan and brilliant editors, and the whole editorial team was amazing. And it was a lot of work to get it to make sense, but we finally got there.
Did they sit in rooms and talk about it to see if they could solve the crime?
No, not really.
I was just going to say, we were kind of in awe of the detectives who carried this case through the decades, that they didn't give up, that Most of them are retired now, or they all are retired, although some are volunteer cold case investigators. And if they could, they'd be working this case right now.
Yeah, let's talk about those investigators, because you even said it a little bit earlier that so many people are tight-lipped about the different crimes. How were you able to get inside and really pay attention to what they felt and experienced?
Well, I think I was lucky. Some of these people I knew when I was a journalist, and then some I met as a novelist. And I think detectives are kind of like reticent to open up their world to you. Mm-hmm. But in my novels, I would say the overall theme of everything I've been doing in fiction is to explain what this job is about, what it takes to do it right. When you go into human darkness, as a matter of course, some of that darkness gets into you. And those are the themes of the books I write. And that has connected me in ways to real detectives who know I'm trying to get it right. And so they are willing to talk to me. And I think that was very helpful. So coming to them, not as a former journalist, but as a novelist, I think really kind of opened up some doors for us.
How has this documentary with Alison changed you as a podcaster?
It's made me say I should give up doing podcasts and stick to the visual mediums, because as we've been talking about, the archival, her production team, they got stuff that I couldn't even come close to getting when I did a podcast.
Wow. Alison, what is the next step for you?
Well, like I said, Michael and I are exploring the theme of secret history of Hollywood. So hopefully we'll have another project that we can get off the ground. I'm finishing a film about Culture Club right now, the band.
Really? Oh my God. Can you talk about that for a sec?
Yeah, sure. It's really about the band. We got all 4 members to go on camera, which was, not an easy thing to do, because there's a little bit of disgruntled unhappiness there. But hopefully, I hope this film will actually be very healing for them, because it's a beautiful story.
Oh, I was going to say, it's a love story. It started out as a love story. Oh my God. And I mean, and what they did to the early part of the 1980s is still inside my heart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is going to be. I think it's going to be very healing for them. I hope. Wow.
Well, your time with that band that had to be a blessing, because I mean, they, especially with Boy George, who I still think is one of the most spiritual people.
Yeah, I have a picture of. I saw the eclipse with Boy George last year.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, when that comes out, we've all got to get back together again. Okay, guys.
Sure.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, you be brilliant today. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much fun, so much excitement. So what happens when you mix ballet with a good drama, one that takes place in 1943? Well, that's what our next conversation is all about with Lucy Ashe. Hello and good morning, Lucy. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing really well, thanks.
We got to talk about this book cover before we even jump into the storyline here, because this book cover belongs on walls all across the planet because it's so beautiful.
I agree. I adore it. I think the combination of the dancing with the London scene and the fairy tale element is perfect.
And it totally sets up the time era that you're talking about inside the story.
Yeah, so the novel is set at the end of the Second World War, and it goes back a little bit into the 1930s, but it's very much a period novel of that time.
What was that like for you to visit that as a creative person?
I love writing historical fiction because I find that the research element is very inspiring for me. I spent about 6 months researching for this novel before I started writing it. So reading memoirs from dancers at the time, books about the experience of being evacuated as well in the Second World War, which was a large element of the book. I also went to archives at the Royal Ballet School, which is where I trained, and looked at archives at the Royal Opera House. So to be able to immerse myself in a very, very real historical productions, ballet performances, but also just what it was like to live during the Second World War was inspiring. And the plot of the novel emerged out of that research.
See, I'm always inspired by people who go back into research, and especially when it comes to the Second World War, because it's a time period that's going to be forgotten if we don't have writers like yourself to bring out stories such as this.
Yes, and for me, it was wonderful to be able to write a novel that was about a story about the Second World War that's not often told. It's set among the real work of the Sadler's Wells Ballet Company, which is a company now we know as the Royal Ballet Company. But they had this amazing journey during the war. For a start, they put on so many productions. They continued to choreograph productions. They traveled all over the United Kingdom. They brought a lot of entertainment and inspiration and escapism for people. But they also were sent to Holland in 1940, to The Hague, when Holland, the Netherlands, was still neutral. And it was while they were there that Germany invaded, and they had to be evacuated, hidden in this countryside house in the woods, and then evacuated on a cargo ship. And it's this wonderful story of art, of dancing, of the kind of bravery of people we don't necessarily always think of as related to the Second World War. And I really wanted to highlight this story and talk about the ways in which art is so important during times of conflict.
Oh yeah, and art is born from darkness, and isn't that what your character is all about? I mean, a dancer with a hidden past. To me, that's where the art begins.
Yes, my main character, Briar Woods, she's a ballet dancer, and during the war, it's a very formative time for her. She has a very close relationship with one of her best friends, but she also loses one of her best friends, and she feels that she is to blame for that. And she is struggling to come to terms with the decisions that she made and the friendship that she prioritized. And she also had, before the war, she had a relationship with a man that led to a very, very difficult decision in which she thought she might have to give up dancing. And then she didn't give up dancing, but she feels a huge amount of guilt for what she did give up. So while the war is over at the end of the book, for Briar Woods, she has a lot to learn and to grapple with.
Wow. Did you become her?
Did I become her?
Yeah, in other words, I mean, because I know as a writer, I mean, I will sit there and I become that character, and then sometimes it's like I'm more of that character than I am myself.
Yeah, and this was a really interesting thing for me because Briar Woods is such a flawed character. She makes decisions that are clearly wrong, but they're so understandable from my perspective. You know, when I was writing this, I loved her. I really understood what she was going through. I felt the pain of her past and the experiences she'd had and the confusion she had. She doesn't really know how to define herself because men have looked at her a certain way that's made her unsure who she is. And I suppose I felt very close to her. So it's very interesting reading reviews now because some people love Briar Woods and they feel the same way. But other people think that she's so flawed that makes her quite unlikable. And I'm not trying to write likable characters. I think I'm trying to write human characters with flaws and features that we can understand. But it's fascinating to me how divided she is for readers.
Well, see, that's exactly the reason why my wife enjoys the book, because she likes that little bit of conflict and where people do make mistakes and people make decisions, because that to me is like it's role playing in the real world.
Yes, I think if we try and turn characters into black or white, good or bad, it just doesn't work. It's not real, and that's part of what I was writing about with the retelling of the fairy tale of the Sleeping Beauty, which runs throughout the novel in lots of different ways. Because the story of the Sleeping Beauty that we know now, the Disney version, the ballet version, is quite straightforward. There's a good fairy, there's an evil fairy, love conquers all, and the castle wakes up from a 100-year curse. But the older, much older, darker, more gothic versions of this fairy tale that have been written by a huge number of different writers, they take away that simplicity. And I wanted to go back to those older, much more troubling versions of the fairy tale and think about it's not possible to say that someone is entirely good or entirely bad, but also to think about why it is that we long for that. We long for certainty because it helps us to understand the world, and especially during a time of conflict, during the Second World War, I think there was this desire to work out who was good, who was bad, and of course that isn't possible. And it's when we allow ourselves to accept uncertainty that we can see people for who they really are.
You know, I love the way that you break things down, because it really gives us the opportunity as readers as well as listeners to hear how it didn't just fall onto the plate. You actually had to sit there and figure it out and build this story.
Yes, it certainly had many, many layers to it. And I knew what I was inspired by. I knew I was inspired by the work of the Sadler's Wells Ballet Company during the war. I was inspired by the fairy tale of the Sleeping Beauty. But from that comes so much. And certainly the book took me many drafts. So it changed, the structure of it changed as I was going. And I think the characters became richer and more complex with every draft that I wrote.
But what's incredible about this, Lucy, is the fact that you're talking about a subject that many of us have never really, allowed to speak ourselves with. And the reason why is because we've always done the music, we've always done the artwork, but we've never done ballet. We don't see that side of the story, but yet it existed, and you're giving us a storyline that really gives us a reason to believe in it.
I think that ballet can be for everyone in any way that they wish. So one of the things that I have found so much joy from is returning to dance through my writing. I did train as a ballet dancer. Yes. I went to the Royal Ballet School in London, and ballet was part of my life. It was my identity. So I knew it very, very well. But it seems like this kind of elitist world, this private world that I was part of. And it's when I stepped outside of it that I could see actually everyone can engage with ballet. It can bring so much joy to people in different ways, either as an audience member, for example, during the Second World War, how many productions traveled to the different provinces of the UK. But also now I go to all sorts of different levels of ballet classes, and sometimes I go to ballet classes that are for adult beginners who have never danced before but want to have a go. And I think it's wonderful that dance can be opened up for absolutely everyone.
Yeah. While you were writing, did you feel the flow of dance? Because, I mean, you in every movement, there's got to be some sort of flow or dynamic.
Yes, I did go to quite a lot of ballet classes while I was writing this, more than I had been before. But I also reminded myself a lot of the performance of the Sleeping Beauty. So when I was at the Royal Ballet School, we I rehearsed quite a lot of the solos, the fairy solos, so I reminded myself of all of those. I went to see a production of it, and I listened to the Tchaikovsky music while I was writing many of the chapters, so I felt very immersed in this.
My wife wants us to be on a live stage. I said, don't you want it to be a movie or some sort of series on Netflix? She goes, no, I want to see this on a live stage. I want it to be a ballet.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I can picture it now.
I mean, because what you're bringing to us right now, because we are the generation that fell back in love with all types of dancing, and for you to write a book about dancing, you're so into our lives right now.
I think so, and I love this about the way that dance in all its forms has become very popular. Of course, there are reality TV shows, but also with social media. I follow a lot of dancers on social media, and I love the way it shows us the behind the scenes. What does a dancer do in a day? It gives us inspiration, even if we're not necessarily going to go and tie on a pair of point shoes for ourselves. We can still find a lot to inspire us and find joy in from watching it.
I fell in love with ballet for one reason, because I'm a third-degree black belt, and I was studying up on martial arts movies, and it is written that ballet inspired martial arts movies. It is the same type of movement.
I can totally see that. There's a real sense of core control with dance. And ballet in particular, is taken by a lot of sports people.
Yes.
It gives you the flexibility, the balance, also coordination of movements. And also it wakes up your brain a little bit. When I go to a ballet class, you're doing a series of about 30 different exercises, and you have to listen so carefully and watch so carefully what the teacher is choreographing in front of you and pick it up instantly. And I think that it is very transferable for so much sport, and also lots of other types of dance. Most dancers will do some form of ballet class as their core. It's that kind of what you return to give you that sort of central discipline to your dancing.
Wow. Where can people go to find out more about you, Lucy? Because I want them to get into your writing and give you lots of love.
Well, thank you. Well, I have a website, which is lucyashe.com, and also Instagram, which is lucyashe_author. And The Sleeping Beauties was published a couple of weeks ago, and it's available from all bookstores.
Oh, and it's in the book cover once again. It can't be one of those books that sits on a shelf. It has to be facing everybody, because when you look at this book cover, there's just so much. There's so much in it.
Yeah, it is. It's very rich. I remember when I first saw when the publisher sent it to me, I was just overwhelmed. I think I might have cried. It was so beautiful.
I love it. Well, please come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to talk to you.
You be brilliant today, okay?
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.